kick in with a couple of things before we start?
Of course.
One of the things that I'm particularly interested in at the moment is what's happening with principal designers and principal contractors, that role, because it's becoming, I think, pretty clear to me anyway, that that's going to be a critical role and a critical area of responsibility, because we've obviously there's a plethora of different standards and requirements that people are now trying to interpret, and the responsibilities on those and the it seems to be now very clearly with the landlord or with the responsible person, which is or the accountable person, depending on whether you're talking about the Fire Safety Act or the Building Safety Act. And then it's then up to the that responsible person to appoint somebody to actually ensure that building regs are followed. So this is over and above any of the secondary legislation and all the rest of it. But there's degrees of clarification taking on. And what for me is interesting is that Regulation 38, which is obviously focused at fire, that's becoming something that is very clear and auditable and checkable, so that it's likely to become the area that people are going to get caught up on. And we started looking at this probably, I suppose, 4 or 5 months ago, as to the subset of the handover information that is included in Regulation 38. And from the reviews that we've had as active plan of people's O&M documentation, we found that that invariably hasn't been adequately provided. And given it's such a critical area, that surprised us a bit. O&Ms have typically not particularly well defined or checked anyway, but you'd think that Regulation 38 items would have been far more heavily controlled. And so therefore we've been looking at ways that we could make that easier for clients and main contractors to be able to ensure that that information is being delivered, so that that element of building regs is complied with. And fortuitously, the secondary legislation that was announced in August specifically makes reference to, in fact, there's a new clause in Regulation 38 that requires responsible people, or the landlord, effectively, the client, to explicitly state that they've received the information that they should have received. Yeah, and they're satisfied with it. So that intrigued me, because I've had even my own people have said, well, if it's gone through building control, then building control should have checked, and therefore we don't need to do anything. And I've spoken to building control, and they've explained to me that what often happens is that they will go and ask the landlord or the client whether they've received the information, and if the client says yes, they sign it off. If the client says no, then they don't sign off the project. So therefore, there's an incentive for the client to say yes. And I've been on projects as well where main contractors have completed as far as they can the O&Ms, but nobody's really gone through and rigorously checked them. And the objective really is to get them signed off rather than rigorously check them. And I'll finish in a second. On a project that we're looking at the moment for a housing association, I was questioning the consultant that's been supporting the main contractor, why there's no information on the communal doors that have been installed. There's no information on the, and she said, we're only paid to, or we're only commissioned to gather the information. We're not required, or our commission didn't include us checking it or reading it. And I'm thinking, what sort of world are we in at the moment? So I went to an event last week at the Association of Specialist Fire Protection, and it was extraordinary. Excellent, by the way. It was very good. And I've got a couple of slides that I can show you later from what, and it does look as though building control, they're moving into a different league of scrutiny, but the responsibility now is very clearly with people to carry this out. So I'll yield to Mr. Waterman.
Thank you. Because I am relatively new to this field, if you could send me the link to Regulation 38, which I may or may not have seen, but I'm not sure. If I explain what I'm trying to do, I used to run a company called Diagram, and my lifetime's ambition, never to be realised, is to get a diagram on an Act of Parliament. Now, and one of the things I'm working on is to, and I think I might have explained this to George, is on the left-hand side of kids' puzzle books, you get 6 different coloured fishing rods. And on the other side, you get 6 different coloured fish. And you have to join the right fishing rod to the right coloured fish. Now, on the left of my diagram are the 9 levels of qualification, starting with what a design architect might need, down to what a craftsman might need laying bricks, and joining up Richard Rogers with a PhD and a brickie with what he needs. But the trouble is to navigate from the role to what is needed. In the middle of that is a shark tank with the odd piranha in. Now, in terms of what you've just said, George, what I think we need is a flow chart to do with Regulation 8, going through the RP building control to set out, this is Regulation 8, what it says, who needs to do what in order to meet that regulation. Now, I imagine there are only 5 or 6 steps, but and I could happily produce that as long as somebody told me what the steps were. And if we were to put that up as a graphic on BIM or on LinkedIn, that would raise the profile of what is not happening in terms of building control and the landlord. Would that be helpful?
A lot of talking, so I'll shut up at the moment. What does the rest of the team think?
I'm probably guessing someone's already drawn this out, George.
Is there any way of identifying whether that's
sorry,
been
George.
done?
Has anyone seen it on this call?
The reason I say, because there were so many diagrams, wasn't there, that came out at one point. I think it's all information overload. So Paul White's got his hand up. Go on, Paul.
Sorry, this was just a separate, but not related to this point. This was something
okay.
separate. Okay.
So I thought you were going to save me then. No,
Maybe not.
no, that's fine, mate. I think it would probably be worth seeing if there's anything out there anyway on it, because there's been Chris, there's been so many diagrams that have been floating around, George.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that, but what I'm saying now is, if this is at the top of George's mind, and this is one specific that is missing, then I don't want a suite of flowcharts as long as a piece of string. Let's just say regulation 8, what needs to be done, pure and simple.
38.
There
is a compliance PAS suite for principal designers. Can't remember all of them now. So there's a compliance PAS.
Yeah.
That PAS lays out what the process should be to ensure that the right people do the right job, and the last one's for managing the building, and it starts with principal contractors and principal contractors, principal designers, and managing the building. So that has sort of the core of what's supposed to be expected. But you're right, George. I've been in the same boat, and also I've gone round in a little circle of what good looks like. So we're not doing new builds, but we're doing repairs and, recladding a building, for instance. And the contractor effectively said to us, what do you want it to look like? How do you want your files to be laid out? And I said, well, it depends what you've got in your files. What have you got? So
Yes.
sort of what, and it sort of, well, what do you want? Well, what have you got? What have you want? What have you got? And we sort of didn't really come up with an obvious answer. But for me, the end result would typically want to look like how our compliance team look at things, right? What do I service? What do I need to repair? When do I need to repair it? How long did it last? What's the maintenance regime? And so there's usually two sets of information. One, what do I have to do regularly to this piece of kit? And what do I need to do long-term wise to maintain it on a long-term basis and replace it eventually? And they're the two bits of kit. What I tend not to need, but I have loads of information on, is how to wipe down a handrail and how to clean paint and what colour it is. And it's like, I don't need to know that bit. I need to know that there is, as you say, as a fire door there, it's certified. This is the size, this is the basics of the door, and this is the fire strategy in a diagram, a plan saying this is a 2-hour wall with these doors in these places, and then separately what you have to do with those doors. It may be, for instance, the door closer is a very good one, but it needs specific servicing regularly. It might need oiling regularly or whatever. If that information doesn't come across, and the trick is what you said, is that if the person receiving it, which can be a development person, and a development person in our line of work often is working mainly on the finance, they're not always very technical. They want to know, can we finance it? Where's the legal status? So they receive all this information and go, oh yeah, this looks lovely. And then they hand it over to the compliance team who, like you said, George, suddenly goes, hang on, there's no information on X, Y, and Z in this pack. There's no information on that. Or it looks like a good bit of information, but when I dig into it, it's a load of generic rubbish and it's not specific about this building.
Yeah.
How many times have I received a catalogue that says this company makes these things? And I go, great, I know that. I know MK makes sockets, but which sockets have we got in our building?
Can I say something? As a development person, as a relatively educated development person, in terms of what you're looking for, having had some asset side experience, Andrew. But yes, you're right in that they're quite often focused on, as you say, funding, timescale, deadlines, not necessarily what you want, and they're often relying on the contractor, and they wouldn't know and have that experience to know, how can they, do you know what I mean, that what you exactly want. and the employer's agent is not, which they tend to use, is not. It's not in their scope of services to necessarily go through, and that takes time. And that's what I found, and what I was going to originally say, is that people are time poor and they don't know what they're looking for. And obviously this is pre-BIM world, but I think it may be still relevant. And but so I've been sitting off and handing over buildings, trying to go through O&M manuals with very large, well-known developers, and trying to educate them and say, no, put the postal addresses on everything, please, because that's not going to mean anything to Adam, block C1 or D12 or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Because they talk and construct, you know what I mean, or at least index it, because quite often the subbies don't necessarily know what the postal address is before they send that information through. But it's indexing.
It's late in the day, usually, isn't it?
Yeah. So
knowing
it's
it's the old milk yard.
Yes.
It's like,
so there's that's eternally the case. So I've tried to do that, and then I've been reassured that everything's in there, Paul. And then when this is at Enfield, when I've been asked by, say, because they need for adaptations to change the front doors, can you find such and such? I go, right, that gives me a chance, rather than going to doing it for our asset team myself. I'll go and find that document and see whether it's there. And I've been reassured everything's there, and it isn't there. Do you know what I mean? And then that happens.
That's been my experience as well.
Yes. And you want drawings indexed so that rather than some sort of file name with lots of figures, it doesn't say what's in the drawing. So you get a whole folder of drawings, but you have to spend hours. And we've gone through this.
Open it.
To find out what you want, and you should have a more detailed index, so just a Word document saying this drawing means But
I've complained about the first set of. I told you we've been just doing an audit on 2 blocks, and we've been back to the contractor. We've spent quite a lot of time digging through the O&Ms that they provided. We've questioned why there was no information on the installed communal doors. Yeah. So now they've sent me a link. Oh, they said, oh, that's not the link you should be using. Right. We've got stuff on our SharePoint file. So they've sent me a link to that. Yeah. So I said, well, before we spend time going through this one, can you tell us what the difference is between the first set of information that you gave us and this one? No. Yeah. And they can't tell me.
No. But going back to your original point, George, about it's just simple communication where you've handed over something, and I've my new job, which I'm enjoying very much at Gresham, where I've sort of interviewed people on both sides. So I want to cut this out. I'm going to come in and sort out any sort of information exchange issues that maybe have occurred in the past. So I've interviewed the team that deal with fire safety, and the development project manager that's handing over the information. And he said to me, well, I quite often find I'm being chased for stuff that I know I've provided months and months ago. So it's the simple, but if you provide it, did you get a message back saying, well, we've received it and change, and it complies exactly with what we want. I've said to both sides, it's a two-way thing. You need to make sure that it's acknowledged both sides, and you have a proper conversation.
Isn't it?
It's because people are a bit time poor because they've got so many other things, but it's focusing that mind. And yes, it will, and it's starting. It's a simple thing, but it's starting to bear fruit in that, and there's a much better dialogue going on now, I'm pleased to say. So it's really positive. Simple thing to sort out. But you're right, Andrew. I completely get. I share your frustration sometimes, but and I can't believe that it's still going on. And we've had all these discussions on these groups. It still happens, doesn't it? I think.
Chris.
But
thank you. What is O&M? Sorry.
Operating and maintenance manuals.
Okay, because I'm more used to M&Ms. Right, now, yesterday, which was my last day in Parliament, I borrowed Chris Bryant's book called
Code of Conduct.
Right? And they use the Dewey system, which probably we're all old enough to remember. And this book is 364.1 132.309.41 BRY. That's how they find it in the library. Now, the reason I'm using that is there a way of identifying a screw or a piece of glass? They've all got barcodes using that system. And is there a template? The other thing I'm doing to work on are safety case reports, which the HSE/BRS will not produce a template for. And my own private view is they're sucking in all sorts of safety case reports, and they will come up with a template eventually based on the hard work that everybody bar them are doing. Now, when I take my car for an MOT, it has the same MOT. My car's a Lamborghini, not. It has the same MOT as a VW Up. There are different bits, perhaps, but in so many of these things, a common standard, a public language could be established. And I know every building is different. And I know every developer is different. I'm still waiting for one that doesn't take a shortcut. But can BIM begin to establish a public language, a common language, to describe some of these things? Regulation 38 might be a place to start.
Yes. Yeah. So we've been doing a lot of work on that, Chris, for several years now. And it isn't easy, but
No.
you're absolutely right that we should be putting some sort of structure. And I can show you quickly what we've been doing on Regulation 38 as an example of that. So I'll hand over back to you in a second, Paul.
That's right.
But if I just show you this.
I mean, I'm coming from left field and I know nothing about this, so I'm the person on the Elizabethan line.
So Paul Oakley, who's one of my colleagues, he used to be the director of BIM at BRE. Paul's been working on this for Barclay Group, actually, has been the main driver, and Bouygues as well. So this is what we've been doing on Regulation 38. What we've done, Paul's been through the Regulation 38 document, which I'll send that to you, Chris. And what we've done here is pulled out the principal notes, because this is what's in Regulation 38. So you can see here the escape routes need to be defined, the fire protection measures. But then we start to come down into more detail here. So the information about fire door sets, safe closing devices, smoke detector heads, etc. And we've then got a list of asset types. So these are things that need to be put in. And what Paul's been doing here, because he's an information management person, is saying, well, can that be actual data, or is it in the form of documents, and what type of documents? So what we're doing at the moment is trying to turn this into, as you say, a template that can then be audited against. So that's just an example of work.
And if I can comment briefly on that, if you could, from column F sideways,
yes,
you could put along the top
who's responsible,
and then color code who's responsible for which bit and who needs to know which bit.
Yeah, well, that's where I hand over now back to Paul McSolly, because that's broadly what we've been trying to do within the roundtable workshops.
All right.
But we've been looking at things from a point of view of it's the context in which a particular item is going to be. What I was just trying to do, though, is on Regulation 38, it seems now under the new legislation, it seems now that there's a real driver for clients to become drawn into taking proper responsibility for that, which I think is a very positive thing, because it will encourage people to look. So, Paul, I'll hand back to you if I may.
No, that's fine, George. No, it's all good stuff. This, I think. I'll have a look again, because I think he's done it now. He's taken all the stuff out of Part B, and he's taken the stuff out of the new legislation, including the Building Safety Act around Regulation 38, which is what Mr. Oakley's done there. I think, George, one of the big things of this information when it gets handed over, and probably to go to your point, Chris, as well, is that I'm sure there's a few flow diagrams around this, because one of the hardest things is when you give essential information over, the hard thing is about how you got to how the system was safe in the first place. So the thread of it is so big. I think you start looking for something which is a bit more general, if that makes sense. It's otherwise, as you say, I think we'll all agree, you can get lost in this subject if you're not careful, because it's so much intertwined in the different regulations now. I think I just want to go back to the agenda that was put together originally, because I think there's a few things on there, and I've just got to adjust my screen here quickly because it's not behaving, so just bear with me. All my approved documents were underneath my laptop, so I had to take them out, so I do apologise. I was using them to prop it up temporarily because I've got millions of them all over the desk at the minute. Never ending reading. So Jess, I think let's go back to your original agenda here, mate, because we've asked the same question of all the different groups here, haven't we? Exactly the same questions. And I think when you look at the agenda, I'm not sure, did you send this agenda out to everyone, or was it just done to me or a few other people? I'll just out of curiosity.
No, it's sent to everyone.
No, it's fine. Just want to verify, so I don't want to catch people off guard. So one of the questions we've asked the design group as well, and we got a good response back from what's his face in design group? George, my brain's gone dead. He sent a good response back, didn't he, as well? What's his name?
Yeah. Daz,
that's it.
Yeah.
Yep. So, which buildings are in scope under the Building Safety Act, and which buildings are in scope under the Fire Safety Act, and who will be doing the reviews? That was one of the questions you've asked everyone, really. What is their viewpoint, and where do they think it kind of sits? And probably to some degree, does everyone understand the difference between the Fire Safety Act and the Building Safety Act, if that makes sense? Which I'm sure most of us in the call probably will.
I'm not sure that I think that's not so clear.
Okay.
Yeah, because the Building Safety Act incorporates things that are in the Fire Safety Act, I believe.
Yeah.
But the responsibilities under the Fire Safety Act are for a much wider range of properties than is covered under the current in scope properties. And in my experience, I don't think very many people are that clear about it, because when I've asked, that our community, whether a project is or isn't in scope or not, as far as the fire safety regulations is concerned, the default position that most people take is it over 18 meters?
Yeah, so the way I see it was, and hopefully everyone, and shoot me down if you think I'm wrong here. Fire Safety Act for me is really simple. It all goes back to regulatory reform. If someone's doing the risk assessment on the building, it falls under the Fire Safety Act, which is if you've got more than two or more domestic properties, you've got to have a responsible person that takes into account all the fire safety measures of the building, if that makes sense. And I'm sure that's how the Fire Safety Act kind of sits to me. You've then got the Building Safety Act, which goes for all buildings, and you've got additional stuff for high-rise buildings. Or have I missed something, do you think? What's everyone else's view, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, the Fire Safety Act is I don't know, 4 sides of A4.
Yeah.
I can't lay my hand on it.
I couldn't prop the computer up with it, Chris. Put it that way. It wouldn't fit.
It couldn't.
It's too small. No.
But that changes. Is it the RRO or something, whatever it is?
Correct. Yeah, regulatory reform.
Yeah, right.
That's
So that refers to that, pure and simple. It's neither pure nor simple, but the Fire Safety Act is just a bit of stuff that gets the order sorted. So which is obviously the secondary legislation. Building Safety Act is a whole new can of worms. But again, people need to know the difference between the two. They need to know the difference between the 4 sides of A4 and what that does, and the 250 pages of the Building Safety Act and what that does.
Yeah.
And again, a simple relationship, just explaining Fire Safety Act, this is what it does. Building Safety Act, this is the relationship one to the other.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Mike, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, okay. How do I start this conversation? The definitions under the Building Safety Act, the Building Act, the regulations, and then the secondary legislations is a minefield.
Yeah.
I think is the honest answer. I think Paul's summary is pretty close, but I think what causes the biggest dynamic is then the reference to the second higher risk buildings supplementary provisions and then the secondary exclusions. And that's where it can get very difficult because the exclusions differ under the Safety Act and under the Building Act. And that's where you can end up with a few ambiguities. So I think the sort of the headline 18 meters, 7 stories, 2 residential buildings, I think is pretty much a safe position. What you then get is differentials between the acts. So it is still quite tricky.
No, and I think, Mike, it's a real big point here, right? Because I think and this is just what I'm seeing, because I work for a big, obviously, construction company, and I think we've probably to a degree, got a bit of overthinking going on because we're trying to drill into everything. And I'm just trying to say to everyone, look, that the whole point this is coming out is because we wasn't selecting things appropriately in the first place and bolting them together to make sure you had a system of a building that was safe. When you start going for the rest of it, as you're saying there, you start getting into different, risk categories of hospitals, schools, and other things. And some things don't fall under higher risk buildings, but they fall under other requirements that brings them into a different process of sign off, which is equally as difficult. And it kind of goes like that. So I'm with
totally,
you. So, yeah.
I totally agree. And actually, again, we're sort of taking more of a stance, which is HRBs are relatively clear, 18 meters, 7 story, 2 units, keep it nice and simple. But actually, I think we're starting to see a roll on, which was we're almost treating the same approach to all buildings in terms of how we manage information, how we reach decisions, sensible and pragmatic fire safety decisions.
Yeah.
And I think we're applying that to all buildings rather than just HRBs.
And that's got to be the way of doing it, is if you do the same thing on every building, because after all, and hopefully, Mike, you agree with this, if the HSE gets called in, they want to see how you've got there. They're going to want to see exactly the same process on anything that you're doing anyway. So.
Yeah, and the Act and the Safety Act and the Building Act both have caveat clauses in them, which basically give the prevention for, or the ability for secondary legislation to adjust and criteria to be amended. So that's only a sort of a journey that we're likely to see, in which the height of buildings will reduce, the scope of other buildings will come in. So I feel that's a direction of travel.
Well, in the design meeting, I think it was Neil brought up the different definitions of what a story is.
Yeah.
Which is it changes. I think he said in the secondary legislation actually was quite a game changer, how they'd actually changed the definition. Don't ask me what the definition is, but it had to do with the roof and the ceiling or stuff, wasn't it, George?
Yeah. Basically, he gave us an example where a basement, a car park, because it extruded just into, just above ground, there's a grating, a window, as it were. Then that became a story. So therefore, it became a 7-story block rather than a 6-story block, which brought it into the provision.
It's funny, isn't it? Because for years, and I'm not trying to speak too candidly here, you've seen different clients or different builders, trying to play with definitions to get things under heights, So
Yes,
it's not surprising, is it? I think that game needs to be up as well, and it's got to be clear. So
absolutely. Could I just ask Andrew from BAM, are you going to be providing principal designer role, as it were? That was something that we were talking about in the design group meeting last week, as to whether contractors are actually going to take on the principal designer as well as the principal contractor role.
we are already, George. I mean, because we have our own internal design and engineering team anyway, which I lead up, and I also sit on the construction board. Even if we don't have, if we use external consultants, we end up being principal designer. No consultant, every consultant we use say that they don't want to be principal designer, even though obviously it was designed to be that. I think so. We're acting as both. I think listening to the conversation, multitasking, apologies here. I think the key issue here, and I think Chris Waterman has highlighted it straight away, is that I think we need clarity. I think the Building Safety Act is a minefield, and what our legal team is, everything is being decided in the courts at the moment. Nobody knows where this is going. And I think, you know, the expert team we have here is already debating definitions of what's what. The more help can be given and the clarity, and I think Chris's idea earlier is a good one. I think is needed. I don't think anyone's intentionally trying to undermine law or the acts or anything else. It's just they're not aware of, or they may be confused by it. Therefore, I think the more clarity we can give and help, the better.
I met last week Chandru, who's the director at Deluxe, and he wasn't aware of the work that we'd done last year or 2 years ago with the Golden Thread Initiative, and he was very interested, and he's asked me to specifically send it through to him, because although Deluxe was given it, we didn't. I'm not sure that most of the stuff that went into Deluxe, nothing's happened with. That's my impression. And he seems to be very interested. So what I'm going to do is make him aware of the work that we've all been doing up till now. And I don't know if you know, Andrew, but you know the things that you did some work on a couple of years ago with those 12 asset type reports that we did. We refreshed all of those in the summer, this summer, so they now will reflect that they're now, you know, obviously more up to date, but we've learned a lot along the way as well. So we've improved those. So those are all available on the BIM4Housing website as well now.
Yeah, no, I think there's a good opportunity for a comms initiative here just to communicate what's being done, because I think the industry would grab it. I think there's a void and a great concern. One of the high risks that I've put for BAM is the Building Safety Act, and that's something that we all should be aware of. And I think, therefore, the more help and guidance, rather than wait till the courts decide, and the courts seem to be deciding on behalf of the developers and not the contractors, or either way, and even certification on materials has been dismissed by the courts. It's a concern of where do we go, what do we do? You almost think give up, because you know you're not going to have a business because you're going to be in court and out of everything. So
Yeah.
I mean, I go back to Chris's original thought. Any clarity on who does what, when, how, where, the better, and to communicate what this group's done would be great.
I think just to jump on that point. Just to jump on Andrew's point. I think, look, you're right, Andrew, as well. Is that the courts are basically siding with the developer, especially over cladding. And
Yes.
I think when you look at all of those cladding ones that have gone on Malali and the rest of them, they've all got something very similar in common, that actually the client gave a brief with a set of requirements, then took a step back.
Yes.
I don't think there's been any cases yet where the client's been ingrained in it, because in statutory requirements in those contracts, you're responsible, like you've drawn it with your own hands anyway, and that's what's coming prevalent in those cases. I think the interesting thing with this will be is that if you get a case that's gone through where the client developer has been very, you know, fingers into what was required and forced it into the contract, I think you might get a different verdict. But I don't think you've got that level of case law yet to kind of rely on. So that's we have the same conversations, fair enough, as you, Andrew, is that, you know, the bottom line at the moment, this actually goes back to Chris's point, is that if you can You know, and there's a conflict here, by the way, because the minute you try and go into contract and tell the client what's wrong with their building, they don't want to hear it. That's the hardest thing to manage anyway. If you can do from cradle to grave how you've got to each product and put it together as a system, this is where the golden thread kicks in. Because I think, I'm sure you'll agree with this, George, as well. This isn't to go too fast, piece, because it's all linked. Is that there's a golden thread for how you get to product selection. My view is very simple, and I'm in conflict with people at DLAC by saying there's nothing wrong with the products. We're not putting them where it's appropriate to use them in the correct system. Facade was different because there was a bit of a porky that went on with the facade systems with was it Rainabond, wherever it was, who did the testing on it through Kingspan. Most other products don't seem to have any of those problems. They're actually tested for a specific function. We're not very good at putting them together. So you've got a thread of how you get to that. Then the other thread actually is the traceability of the product. So it's basically your factory control procedure, batch numbering, serial numbering. And I think, George, probably BIM does that already. That bit's already there. The bit that's not there is how you get to the safe product. So I think for you as well, Andrew, the problem is that we all need a mechanism to guarantee when we get a spec through, we can interrogate it and say, is it actually the right thing for the building? Does that make sense? That's where I've
Yeah,
kind of
no,
got to.
I think that's where the void is, and I don't think
Yeah.
anyone can answer that, because basically, what take British Gypsum used to have sort of details from the white book that you could go ahead and use. Now they're backtracked, and therefore there's a void just on that, and there's all sorts of issues and been questions on buildings already. And then we're talking about certified details, and the only way to get certified details is to fire test it. And is every contractor, is everybody going to start fire testing? Ultimately,
It's already
we
there.
used to,
It's already there. That is. It's already
Yeah.
there. The furnaces are fully booked up. And
that's what I mean. So who's going to pay for that?
I think and I think I'll send some stuff out at the end of this because and I know I didn't get to go to where George was the other week. I'd like to attend to do a lot of work with the SFP, but essentially there's only going to be and it's in the Act anyway. Construction product regulations and ISO, and you've got regulation 7, which gives you a few more options on it. So those routes are already there, and that's not going to change. I think the problem is identifying what route suits your building. And is the because you're asking an architect, no disrespect to architects there's any in the room, to understand the wall, the type of thickness of it, the kit you're using, the risk of the space. It's too much. It's that bit was where the void kind of sits. And I think a lot of work that George has done, which you sent to DLAC last year, George, covers a vast majority of it. But I think it's that even those guys probably can't understand what it actually means in practice, if that makes sense.
I think just to add to that, what we're getting, which is bizarre, so it's falling back on in my department, is most consultants, architects are putting everything contractor design portion. They're saying, oh no, we don't know enough about facades and envelopes, waterproofing, anything else that go beyond this. So everything's going to CDP, and they're saying, well, what's the point of it? Take on board an external designer if everything's a CDP.
Which actually is a fait accompli to the PD role that George is referring to.
Yeah.
So.
Yes.
While you've been talking, Andrew, this is the golden thread. I don't know if you've seen this.
I
love
have,
this
yes.
one. Every time it comes up, Chris, I love it.
I've been looking at a taxonomy which was designed from animals, and it starts off at the very top with the domain, and at the very bottom the species. Now we need a taxonomy of buildings, because at the top every building is a building, and then you can break it down to you can slice it a variety of ways, but you end up with, is it a high-rise building? Now I think that the law as it will apply to high-rise buildings is the gold standard for every building, because if you haven't got a personal emergency evacuation plan in a 5-story building, there's no defense in law to say, well, it's not a high-rise building. So I think that some clarity, a decent glossary, and there's a bit of a glossary in the Building Safety Act, but it's just not tying it up in endless slabs of text. I mean, I was reading something the other day that the HSE put out, and it'll come to me in a minute, where there's all sorts of flaky words they're using. You know, what on earth does appropriate mean? You know, the road to hell is paved with words like that. And just skipping to one side, I'm sorry to go off message. Angela Rayner is now the shadow levelling up minister, which is very good news because she's a bit direct and she doesn't have a degree. So there are two huge things in her favour. And yesterday I was talking to Mike Amesbury, who is the shadow housing minister. And I know both of them very well. So I think from one of my unique selling points is I've got a parliamentary pass, so I can begin to feed stuff into the opposition, and also in the Lords, which I've been doing on sprinklers in schools lately, and RAC. I'm the latest racketeer in Parliament, but I think, Andrew, it's clarity, clarity, and clarity. And you mustn't mistake clarity for simplicity. We don't want it made simpler, we just want it made clearer. And that is why I think that's why I'm, you know, a diagram obsessive.
Mike.
Yeah, okay. There's probably just taken a few steps back and then coming a few forward on a couple of things. So I think there was a discussion around BIM and standards and naming conventions that started at some points, and it's always one of those things. I think the standards are actually there. I think the naming conventions, the requirements of BIM, naming, you know, Uniclass standards, they all exist. I know Paul's just did that grimace, which I completely understand. And I know that there are some challenges with it, but I think what we regularly see is that rather than maybe helping move those standards move forward, they stagnated a little bit. And then what happens is you end up with a bit of differences of views and differences of opinion to it, which is potentially what we've got here with the new Safety Act, is that there is some ambiguity and some unclarity points.
Sorry to interrupt, Mike.
Sure.
What do you mean by the Safety Act?
Sorry, not the Safety Act. I mean, there are standards for BIM. So there's
what I mean is that there is nothing called the Safety Act.
Sorry, correct. Building
and I
Safety
know
Act.
I'm being picky, but because I'm new to this, I know the Fire Safety Act and I know the Building Safety Act. Which one have you been referring to?
So I refer to two. So the Building Safety Act and the Building Act are the two that I typically see as the baseline structure from what we're looking at now.
And the Building Act, that's the old one, isn't it?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I need to be very precise. Yeah. Okay. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no problem at all. I was interested to pick up on Andrew's point as well with regards to CDP elements again. We do a large amount of recladding projects, as a result of what's happened. What we're seeing is a big shift the other way, in that what we are finding is we are being pushed to fully design and fully name and identify all products within the external facades, and very much limit the number of CDPs, which has its own challenges both ways, I guess, is the thing with this. So it was interesting to hear what Andrew was saying there.
I think just on your point, Mike, as well, I wasn't grimacing to be rude. I think what it was is no, I'm not trying to be rude. I think through discovery, this is where George's forums came into very good use for everyone. Is that when you take Uniclass, and I'm sure George will rescue me at some point when I get outside of my competency, right? But when it comes down to Uniclass and all the asset information, we looked at things like fire dampers and fire resistant ducts. And what we found was, and I agree with your point as well, I'm only interested in probably 3 things: the Building Act, the building regulations, you know, not so much the approved document. The BSA's had some effect on some of that stuff for me as well. But the fundamental thing is, and I'm going to answer this in 2 ways, is Regulation 7 for you, Chris, says whatever you do, it must be appropriate for the circumstances for which it was designed.
Yeah.
And what that basically means is that if you put a fire damper in a building, the appropriate of the circumstances is the circumstances of the risk of that damper is exposed to from either side of the wall. And that risk can be changed by the purpose group of the building. Hospitals, schools,
Yeah.
commercial office. And that's the intention of it. To judge appropriate, you've got to have a good judgment on what risk is it exposed and from what period of time. That's all it's asking you to do. Then it says something which is really good, just install it in a workmanlike manner. Don't put it in like a bag of, crap, which is one of the battles we all fight with on sites. So getting back to the BIM thing, what we discovered is when you look at these products like fire resistant ducts, there's probably about 60 things you need to record in the asset information. For one, how you got to the product, how it's classified. That classification isn't just REI, that's all futile. It's EIS, it's the pressure, it's the type of system, it's multi-single, it's the rods, it's the expansion, all these other things come into it. And that's all dependent on the risk of what the system's doing. And that's where the BIM side falls down. So when I said about you can track the assets, you can. That's in there in Uniclass. What you can't track in the Uniclass at the moment is the specific fire safety functions of the product because it's deficient. And that's the bit where the templates don't exist. Yeah. And if I've said anything wrong there, George, please shoot me down. Which
No,
about putting that.
I think the only other thing I would say about Uniclass is that it can be that it's not adequately explicit. I'm not quite sure how because Uniclass, Uniclass has got, I think it's 7 or 8 tables. Mike can perhaps correct me on this.
Yeah, it's something like that.
You've got a table for the product. You've got a table for the system that the product might be in. You've also got a table for entities. You've got tables for, I think there's new tables now come out for materials, which were in the original Uniclass. So in other words, what you've often got, a particular damper might carry several different Uniclass references.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah. So therefore, the point about where that damper is being used may change its classification.
Yeah.
What's the issue with that though?
Oh, I can I can answer that one. What it is, Mike, is and we always have this laugh because I mean I can go to the SFP function the other day, but I do work a lot closely with the SFP than probably most of the people I know do now. And what it is that when you look at classification of devices, you got to put it into boxes and say, if you talk about a fire door is a bit transient because you can move through it, right? So the function of a fire door is a function of its requirement for probably Doc M, and its function of requirement for security and visual, so you can either see through it or you don't need to see through it. Then you've got the Part B element. And all of those functions are applicable to that Part B element. So the fire door is a summation of the risk to the left and the risk to the right of it, and the ability of the person to use the door, and actually its ability to probably work in pressure regimes for smoke control if it's applicable, and the security function that's assigned to it. If you don't know all of them, you can't pick the right door.
But can't you then, Uniclass gives you the option though to say, I just want to specify a door and then include the requirements in there rather than saying I want a timber door or whatever it is to define the Uniclass. So the whole idea of the Uniclass structure there is, let's do it as a brick because brick's a nice easy one. I could say I want a generic brick. I don't really know what I want yet, but I want to create the criteria or the performance criteria, or I could say I want a clay brick. So if you've got the option there to select based on which route you want to go.
I'll give you another example. That's a door. And that's a transient product. If you take, say, a smoke control duct, and it's doing a smoke control function from a 1 hour compartment, but it's traveling through 90 and 120 minute and 30-minute compartments, you've got to protect the whole system to meet the requirement of the original high, you could say the highest risk extract point on that system. And you might have other points that are lower, maybe higher. So you might have one that's unsprinkled and it's 120 minutes. That could make the whole system 120 minutes throughout, and it classes it as a multi-system. But if it was an hour and it was sprinkled, well, it wouldn't be, you know, this has an effect on the fan resistance or the fan type anyway, but you might have a system where it only needs to be an hour throughout to protect the fire breaking and out of that duct, because it's a smoke control duct. It's not like a door left to right. It's just into the duct and out of the duct, and you have the penetration at the wall. You can find yourself having different insulation requirements throughout the building for that system and different wall types. And that's the kind of bit where Uniclass can't pick it up, because you've got to know the pressure of the system. You've got to know whether it's multi, whether it's single. There's always other things that come into it, if that makes sense. So if you look at,
yeah, so I was just
Go on,
going to
George.
sorry to cut across you. Yeah, so the other thing, Mike, just to build on
Yeah.
what Paul's saying there, it's the context in which that particular classified item. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with Uniclass. It's just that for a purpose, it may not be adequately specific.
Yeah.
So the context in which that fire damper, for example, you know, one of the challenges that we've got in maintenance is that there's a difference between a smoke damper and a fire damper.
Yeah.
Right. And you know, SFG 20, for example, the maintenance is for a smoke and fire damper, right? And they're different. So it's that level of granularity that is important.
But doesn't that exist within the Uniclass system? And that's why
I don't think it does. No,
it doesn't. And I think what it is as well, I mean, look, it's like this, and really, and this isn't to go into too much detail in the meeting because we'll bore the life out of everyone, but when you test products in a furnace, whether it's a damper, a duct, a flue, because flues have temperature class. Do you want a T200, 400, 600? All depends on the soot grade of the flue, and that affects the seal at the wall. So you've got to record it, and Uniclass doesn't cover that, because I think the whole problem with it at the moment is everyone refers to fire stopping like it's a thing. There's no such thing as fire stopping. It doesn't exist. It's actually penetration seal specific to a product. And what I've shoved in the chat for you, and this is still work in progress, but it kind of gives you an idea of some of the fire resistance standards that are out there and the different performances that they record, and nothing's the same. And that's the bit where the Uniclass doesn't pick it up, because you need someone to have the effort, and that, I mean, George has spoken about this before, to agree all the language, or you say the ontology of it all, George, to get it into templates where it can go to industry as a set standard to record stuff. We're not there yet. So 'cause if you want to change a product from A to B later on, you look at change under the Building Safety Act, the high-rise building side of it, high-risk buildings, on notifiable change. If you change the classification higher, it's not really a big issue. It's just notified. But if you go lower, then it's a problem. So you've actually got to know what it was you were going from and to in the first place. And the classification isn't just REI. It's cycles. It's destiny. When you talk about, you know, like the rack thing recently, dampers, if they're motorized, even if they're non-motorized, they go through a cycle test for durability. So you know how long they will last in practice. So a lot of the stuff you hear about products, you know, the standards aren't there for reliability. The standards are there. And it gets recorded, it gets classified, but we just don't ask for it. That makes sense. It was an eye opener to everyone, wasn't it, George? When we first went through it a couple of years ago. And as you say, that great work went back to BRAC, and I don't know what happened to a lot of it. To be honest with you, it was all there. So.
No, I think we'll be able to resurrect that.
Yeah.
Another simple example, Mike, is a pump. Yeah. A circulating pump, depending on what system it goes into, would carry a different it's a different thing from a maintenance point of view. The product's still the same, but the context in which it's being used is different. And
Yeah.
that's not a problem with Uniclass. That's I think why we've got several different classification systems, because you need that for different purposes.
Maybe let's just think of a different question then. If we don't use Uniclass,
I definitely think we should use Uniclass.
Yeah.
It's just
So-
that you might need to hold against. I'm sorry to cut across you, but what you probably need to do is have several different classification systems against an asset, so that you can then interpret it for that purpose. Does that make sense?
yeah, I mean, I guess the way in which I look at it is when we start specifying elements within a building, what we will do is we will either have a specific product that we are looking to do. We are specifying, I'll go back to bricks. We are specifying a clay brick. Therefore, we find the Uniclass element and away we go. That gives us our baseline. Or we will say we are specifying a brick, but we don't yet know what it is. So if we're doing a generic specification, then we would use a different code. So if it's generic, it's one code. If it's specific, it's another code. And then we would adjust it as we go through that process.
And Mike, I'd agree with you. I think the problem with a brick is that it's a static item, right?
Yeah.
And I think this is where I think when we looked at this, and I don't mean this to be, this is about, you know, a brick's a brick. And I know it doesn't sound a bit funny. It could be a low bearing brick or a non-low bearing brick, but essentially it's just REI. That's all it is, right? When you start coming on, there might be some durability things that when you start coming to some of these other products, when you start looking at the actual fire critical nature of the classification, the numbers are huge. And the thing is, you can't sort of go, it's just a fire damper as an example, because what George was pertaining to is that if you've got a phased evacuation building, then you might have to have fire dampers which have a smoke leakage on, which means they're motorized. And if you base the system on just a fire damper and it was a fully open curtain damper, you might find your ventilation systems 50% undersized. And we've seen that happen because it has to be specific day one to fulfill the function of the specific point that it's at. And to give you the example, a fire damper on a wall is classed as vertical, but a pipe in the same orientation is classed as horizontal, because one travels through compartments, one is a wall device. And it's the way the standards have been set up. And it's literally, I mean, no joke, this is how complex it is. You could probably go and do a degree just on penetration seals for pipes and trays. And then you go and look at things like fire dampers, you need to do another one. It's unbelievable how complex these things are. And that's part of the issue, is that I think we kind of, as an industry, we treated it all like fire stopping, and actually it's not. The fire stopping is just a seal that goes around the penetration of a functional piece of equipment. And a brick is a brick. A damper's got a function. Do you mean a flue's got a function? There's slightly different dynamics at play. And that's the hard bit, because I think we all do this, don't we? Generalize it to one point. You know, it's not saying anyone's doing anything wrong. I think it's just a bit of a cultural change and getting our heads around actually some of this kit performs a function. Even like doors, you might have different leafs, and that has effects on how these things are classified as well. Same as lift doors, 2 to the right, 1 from the left, 3 from the left, none to the right. There's all testing involved that's different for each sort of arrangement. It's yeah, it's a minefield, as you said earlier, minefield.
Rabbit holes.
Rabbit holes is the word.
Can we just I'm just wondering, oh sorry Chris, yeah, you've got a comment.
Very briefly, if it's a minefield, then initially we need the fanny belts that stop you getting blown up. First point. Secondly, and I don't know about Uniclass, but I'll have a look at that. If you've got a generic brick and the type of a brick, and they need some different code, again, there must be a way of describing what sort of bricks, so that you're putting the different codes next to brick. If brick A, generic brick, brick B. So all I'm trying to think of is how you get more clarity.
Yeah, that's exactly what Uniclass is designed to do. Yeah, it's just that there's another classification system which quantity surveyors use for managing work. So the task of working to fit the brick or to fit the door, that comes into a different classification system, but it's still referenced to a door. So therefore, they have a classification system for a door, which actually is designed around being able to allocate what work item is needed against it. Somebody else will have probably a different classification system for doing maintenance against it. There's a range of different things, all of which refer back to the thing, which is the door.
Okay, but if you look at a door, and I'm doing another project in another field on artificial intelligence, there must be a way of correlating these different classification systems.
Yeah, but what you've got to do, artificial intelligence can't tell you what those relationships are. You need the human, with the knowledge of people like Paul and Mike and Andrew to be able to determine that. But once that, you're quite right, that once that decision has been taken by a subject matter expert, we should be capturing that relationship, the context, and then feeding it into AI tools, definitely. Because
again,
at the moment we're just overwhelmed with too much information, and everybody's at the moment talking about competence and expertise, and we're running out of time, aren't we?
Yeah, and just to be slightly controversial, I've been reading BIM4Housing's expert recommendation on mitigating risk in fire doors.
Oh yeah.
It's a very good, very comprehensive document.
Thank you.
The thing that made me shudder was the use of bullet points and not numbers.
Why?
Because if you want to discuss this with anybody, if you are looking at, for example, what risks does a fire door set mitigate, you can't say, look at point 3. You've got to say, if you count down the bullet points, it's the 5th one from the bottom.
Okay.
Yeah.
Richard, you need to think about that.
I can't believe we did it that way originally, George. Can you?
Yeah, I'll tell you why we did. I actually agree with Chris, but it was decided to do it that way because as soon as you put numbers, it implies preference.
Yes.
That I don't agree with that. This wasn't my decision, but I actually agree with Chris.
But,
No,
I mean, that's
so I'm very happy to change that.
Because it did come up at the conversation, Richard. I remember it. I remember you saying it as well about the preference.
So put letters. But if you're looking at the 20 things that a door set risk is susceptible, I can't discuss that with anybody easily without they either read the whole list or count down the bullet points.
Well, we don't want you using it, Chris.
No, of course not, because that's not what it's for.
What's the matter with you?
It's like the Building Safety Act.
Chris, I'm very happy you raised that, and now I can change it.
Perfect.
Good one.
Good. Paul, what is
Sorry,
Lang O'Rourke doing anything in this field on the principal designer role? Sorry, Andrew. Paul.
Are you talking to me, George?
Yes, I apologise. Sorry.
There's
so
quite a lot of Pauls on the call.
Are you with Lang O'Rourke still?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know if Lang O'Rourke are looking to take on the principal designer role? Is there conversation about that?
Well, I mean, I don't know if there's a sort of general policy on it, but we are the principal designer on the project I'm working on at the moment. So the answer is yes. And I think, I mean, I'd expect that it's probably the case on several projects. So yeah, we're
Sorry, can I just differentiate, because this is also confusing, right? There's a principal designer under CDM, and there's a different principal designer under the Building Safety Act. I don't know what the differences are.
Are there anything? Are they related, or is this completely separate?
Andrew, are you aware?
They're sort of similar, but they're clearly got different rules under the Act. So actually something for Chris, right? Chris, maybe, because I've come across this in several occasions on different types of legislation, to have a word which those in power when they write an act, when they come up with a definition, before they publish it, can they check that whether that definition already exists?
Yeah.
They did it they did it under the electrical when they changed, they made Part P. They invented a responsible person, and a definition under electrical safety under the British standard for electrical safety already had a responsible person. And then they invented a new definition called responsible. It's like, we've already got one, and now you've created, and it means something completely different. And it's similar here. They've said, oh, we'll call it the principal contractor, but under this Act, it means something different than in this Act.
Right. In the bad old days, I would sit down. My background is education. I would get a bill, and I'd go and talk to the civil servants, and I'd say, "What do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean?" And these sorts of issues would come up. Post 2010, and I'll stick with the education example. Post 2010, Gove stopped the civil servants talking to anybody. He moved all the civil servants out, so there was no institutional memory. And that's what's happened in education. In building, I think the same might have happened. I mean, procurement can mean all sorts of things. For example, CDM, I used to put those letters after my name in the way that Carl Stokes did. And people said, "Oh, what's that then?" I said, "Cadbury's Dairy Milk." And so the problem with the current administration, and this is, I suppose, a party political point, that all of the people writing the legislation, their parliamentary council, they know what they're talking about because it has to be the letter of the law. Explanatory notes are written by Oxbridge humanities graduates who are paid by the syllable. So instead of saying a basic plan, they will say a rudimentary conceptualization because they get 10 times as much money. So to answer your point, that is why when I used to get in on the ground floor with the Education Acts, I would say, "I don't want to set any hairs running, but do you really mean that? Because that means that somewhere else."
Quite.
That no longer happens. And this is the absolute bugger, because there is no institutional memory. There's nobody in the DFE or Deluxe that was there when.
We had this problem before.
Right,
Let's not do it again. It
one
doesn't happen.
Classic example. 15 years ago, I was a personal member of the ministerial group looking at diplomas. Right? Michael Gove got rid of diplomas. 15 years later, they're coming up with T-levels, which are the dead ringer for diplomas with the same problems, but none of the civil servants were around when I was there, and I'm bloody old, I know that, but nobody was there 15 years ago to say, "Hang on, let's get the diploma file out and look where things went wrong." So I know that's a long-winded answer to your question, but again, every time a glossary comes out, somebody should say, "Hang on, does that mean what this means?" Because it's glossary bracket Building Safety Act 22 close bracket, not the other
Yeah,
one.
CDM or whatever. Yeah.
And the trouble is, the current administration have destroyed that informal relationship. You know, BIM would have been sitting alongside the building safety bill writers to say, can we clarify this? Can we clarify this? And that would have got rid of a whole lot of red herrings. Sorry, that's a long-winded answer.
Yeah. So Paul's, you're thinking we're principal contractor, but does that mean
No, do you know
CDM
what?
or?
I think what it is,
Yeah,
certainly to me.
sorry,
Oh,
just
sorry,
to
sorry, you
clarify.
talked, Paul, sorry. Sorry, Paul. Twenty Pauls.
No, just to clarify, I think what I meant was we're the CDM principal
Right.
designer, but yeah, on the other principal designer for the Building Safety Act, I'm not sure what the policy is or what direction. There have been a few conversations, but I haven't been involved in that. I'm very much sort of project based and sort of operational, so it's sort of happening at another level to me.
Because one of the other issues, I think Paul Sully mentioned it really, I think it was that when you try to go to a specialist and say, right, we want to put your name down as the designer for this product or whatever, or you're the installer of that product, and people back away going, oh, no, I'm not going to be that person. Are you finding, as we are, that some of that is restricted because of their insurance coverage? And therefore we would expect them to take on responsibility. Well, you installed it, you picked it, you fit in it. You must be the signed person, and they'll go, I'd love to, but my insurance won't let me.
Just
Just
funny, Andrew, right? And I think if you look at it this way, right? We sign contracts where we do design and build, right? It might be major project form, it could be, standard JCT design and build, but all heavily amended. And basically, if someone's drawn a pineapple on the construction site, we've got to go away and make that pineapple work for whatever you want. You may have only priced a pineapple, but you might need something completely different. We're still responsible for the adequacy and statutory requirements. Is what you see come out in Malali is that they've not understood that and they've gone away and followed whatever the client wanted blindly. No disrespect to the clients. Everyone tries to be too helpful, right? Rather than saying, actually, this doesn't work. So you look at it and you go, if you go to a specialist supplier and you go, and this is the way I see it's going to roll, and you go, we're going to bring you on board now to put a smoke control system in the staircase. We're giving you a shaft that's this big and a staircase, and you've got to make it work. There's a good chance now what might happen is they go, well, actually, we can't make that work. We'll go and do the design for you. What comes out at the end of it, you might need a push system as well as a pull. You go, but design the layouts of the flat, so that there's going to be a problem with procurement chain that's going to come out, I think, via insurance when people suddenly are getting sued for things being wrong. And they're going to go, you ain't touching it if you already designed it. You either get us in at the start, and I think all housing developers, my view has always been you should have pod manufacturers if you're doing pods, smoke controlling early and sprinklers in early as a bare minimum. That's your free, because it affects everything. And the problem with the word fire stopping, hopefully Mike's still on the call as well, it's just another one to say, is that you can't get a specialist in like I don't know, the ones that are out there that apparently bring it all together, because you're not just talking pipes and cables, you're also talking ventilation and other things that are completely outside of their knowledge fields. They've all got specific classifications which are different. So the question comes down to, at the moment, the industry conundrum is, who has got the skill set to bring it together? Because clearly architects don't have the skill set for all these complicated classifications. Fire engineers are taught on hose length, distances and things like that, and general principles of the regulation, but they're not product specific specialists. They don't understand the products. The manufacturers are no good on space risk. See where this is going. So the industry needs a mechanism to make that easier. I think to say on the BIM thing will come later when we've actually all got some agreement on how you record. And I'll put a copy of what me and George went through previously in the chat. And it's just all the different things that are involved with one location, depending on what you want to buy for the space risk. And that's what you've got to try and record. It doesn't exist. So until we get to a point where we can actually get that ratified out in a simple, digital, in such a way that, where everyone can process it, it's going to be really hard. And I think the insurance market at the moment, Andrew, doesn't know how to price this risk, doesn't know how to do it. And when insurers can't price something, they either restrict or overprice the cover that they're going to give you.
So,
do you know what I mean? I hope they kind of answer, because I don't think there's a simple answer, but if you put it in the context of those parameters, you go, geez, that's what's coming.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the practice, is that, yeah, a lot of people are saying, don't blame me when it all goes wrong.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, because at the moment, as you say, there are so many complications, and that's why they can't.
I think people are nervous as well to say, actually, the space risk there is X. Do you know? I think that's part of the issue
But the
as
answer
well.
is, yeah, the answer is in practical terms, not necessarily insurance terms, but in practical terms, is that we've been told with this legislation from now on, sit down together, come up with the proper design that everyone's happy before you go to building control, because that way you're not doing what we used to do, which is, oh, here's a building, I'll get Fred to design that bit later, and then he, as you say, so many times, Paul, they turn up and goes, no way that's going to fit in there, and it's the wrong type, in the wrong size, in the wrong dimensions, blah blah blah. But we'll have to make a compromise now, because you've restricted us to that. So, but yes, it all comes down to blame, doesn't it, at the end of the day? And that's the thing about insurance and courts, what we're talking about. But yeah, the answer is sit down and say, look, if I do this, how does it affect you here?
Yeah.
Then they go, oh, is that all I need to do? Is make it like 3 centimeters bigger? Yeah. Oh, okay, that's not too bad. Yeah, and as you say, things like they take the ERs from the client, which is basically, look, I want about this sort of thing, I want this sort of thing, and they take it as, oh, you've asked for exactly this, and it's like, no, I'm trying to be generic, and you're taking it too specific. Oh, well, he asked for a red door, so I'm fitting a red door. It's like, I don't mind a blue door, you know, just make it work.
You get it both ways. Sorry, Chris, I know you're waiting on the call now. You get it both ways, where you get employers' agents that go, I bought a red door. If you're going to go to a blue door, I want money back.
Oh, yeah, that's all that.
Sorry, Chris, go, mate.
Yeah, a couple of things. When I go into Screwfix, actually, I'll never go into Screwfix. If I were to go into Screwfix and buy a screw, it would have a barcode. And nearly everything that goes into a building has a barcode. So is that one way of making sure that the screws I buy to put back in the beading around the vision panel on a fire door is the right sort of screw? Just a thought. And I hope you're not building HS2 on your own, Paul. But and I'm sorry that you don't know who you are really, or what you are. I'm teasing. But if you look at this is the Act. That's the explanatory notes. They're the examples. This is my plain guide to the builders. What we need under here are the sort of questions that you're asking about what principal designer is. You know, we need a fourth colour to raise all these sorts of questions.
Yeah.
I would put this online, but it cost me about 15 grand to develop. And I don't trust the construction industry not to take it for note.
Now, we put it on HIS Direct and everyone can download it for free. That's what we do to you, mate.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think in this industry at the moment, no one knows who they are at the moment. That's the hard bit. Now, I think, to be honest, because I think the bones around. I really need to wrap this up because people have got to go. Is that for those who went for regulatory reform, this is doing things in reverse. Except building control still don't have any, responsibility to say what you're doing is safe. It still lies with you.
Yeah.
But he's doing it in reverse. And I remember when that all happened. I remember the green goddesses on the street of London. I'm sure you will, Chris, as well. You know, you're probably still in your paper around then, Chris. You know, so
my granddad was driving one.
That's how old those vehicles are. I know. I'm only in my mid-40s, so I've got nothing on the age thing here for other people. Everyone's only a few years older than me, by the way. I just think when you look at it, all of this stuff that's there, I've always come back to it, is that we're not being asked to anything different. I think it's now about getting it in such a way, like you said about the barcode, and just as a thing there, Chris, is that that method already exists. It's already there in BIM. You can
Yeah.
track barcodes, you can put
Yeah.
it in rooms. The issue that exists, and I come back to it again, is that we don't have a robust method to enable everyone that is petrified at the moment to put the towel on the donkey in the right place. And that's the problem that exists. And
Yeah.
even in businesses where I work for, and I go, if you follow these 12 points and you get to what's appropriate for the circumstance, you make sure it's in the correct system, you do the QA, you can make it work. The thing is, we want to push this down the supply chain, because actually we want to be a management company. And you go, actually, my personal opinion is the PC are the only people that can deal with it, especially in design and build, because we're responsible for managing the actors involved. People don't want to hear that though. That's the kind of cultural thing that still exists. And in like, I think that, just get to Jess's questions quickly. Impact to two staircases is a classic example. Are they two firefighting stairs in all but construction, or is it a firefighting stair with evacuation lift, and there's a slightly different spec for it because it's non-definable? And that's what's causing people bother.
The two staircases is a political soundbite gone mad.
See you, Josh. No, look, I mean, Chris, look, my biggest thing is, I want to say this in the right context because we're recording, is that the total compartmentation failure, two staircases won't help you.
No,
You won't get to either of them. That's the way I would look at it. That's just in my whole safety brain. You get to either.
I asked somebody at a conference last week, is stay put a dead duck? And they said, well, I've got a long answer, which wasn't an answer. And I said, OK, let me ask you a simpler question. What do I tell my handicapped 79-year-old sister-in-law living in a high rise to do if there's a fire?
Yeah.
Hey ho.
No. It's all cut there. We could go on about this forever, but it all comes down to evacuation plans for people as well.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest issue. Look, I see stuff that comes up from other things, and I can't say too much, but people are complaining about old buildings with no provision for certain things. And you go, well, actually, that's what was there at the time. You own the building. You're supposed to put a management strategy in for your own risk assessment. And they go, what's it got to do with us? Well, you're the owner. It's your building. Just honestly, everyone wants to pass all of their responsibility in life away. It's so hard. But I need to shoot as well, guys, to be quite frank with you. I think we got through most of it, Jess, didn't we? Indirectly. He's just still there. I think he is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we got through most of it indirectly there anyway, and I think it's been a good conversation. But I think it'd be worth as well getting Das's notes circulated as well from the design group, just because they were very. And I might send a few bits out as well, just to, I think it'd be worth circulating. Just some things around, because I think one of the big things, I'm not being disrespectful to anyone, is that I'm very clear on what Regulation 7 means, because I've had to deal with it for the best part of 17, 18 years. I understand what the Act's saying is no different to Regulation 7. It doesn't have to be CPR compliant products. The ultimate test is it's appropriate for where you're putting it, because not all construction regulation products will work for specific risk categories. You wouldn't stick stuff that's fire damper tested in a laboratory when you've got pathogen risk, because you'll probably kill everyone outside. You put something in which deals with the pathogen risk first, then you deal with the fire separately. That's the point I always make. So I think I'll get some stuff out on that as well. Okay, so that'd be good. And Chris, good to see you again, mate. Good to see you. And Mike, thanks for your conversation as well, Mr. Smith. If he's still there.
Yeah, thanks for everyone's time. Really good. Good
and
chat.
Not trying to be too hard work, Mike. It's just that thing I sent through probably is quite encompassing, and it kind of takes your breath away when you look at it and you go, what is all of this stuff? And that's kind of the animal as a whole.
As you said, we're all grappling with these things from different sides and different views, and actually understanding the different challenges really helps to give a great understanding.
It does, and facades is still a nightmare, mate. Still a nightmare.
Yes. And again, if I can pick you up on use of language, Paul, you use the word simple, never use the word simple, use the word clear.
No, clear, no, you're right. And it is. It's and I would change that in my stuff at PFKG, because I wrote something out originally about simple, digital, legible, and the rest of it, and it's been used by other people. And you're right, it should be clear. You're right.
Because politicians are simple.
I think we all are at heart, Chris. I think life makes us, you know, makes it harder for us as well. But look, I'll let you all go and have a lovely day, everyone. Stay safe, yeah.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks.
Cheers, everyone.
Thanks.
Take care.
Thanks,
Bye.
thanks ever so much.
Cheers for coming, Chris. Cheers, everyone. Bye bye.
Cheers. Bye.
Cheers.